Communications and Engagement. Recording is in progress. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager with Engender. We're really delighted to welcome you today to what I hope will be a really thought-provoking and engaging event. We're using Zoom's webinar function today, which means that we can't see or hear you. It's a wee bit disorientating, but you can see and hear us. And please do add any questions that you have throughout the session into the Q&A chat function. We'll feed these through and collate and come to questions at the end. We also have live closed captioning enabled. Amanda is with us today to provide that. So if you do require it, please do turn the function on in your Zoom settings. So we join here today to launch our new report, Sex and Power in Scotland 2023, and to explore the urgent need for not only more women in positions of power in Scotland, but more diverse feminist leaders in those influential roles. We will add shortly in a moment, my colleague Maxine will add a link to the report. It's now live, just gone live in the last half an hour, and a launch blog with that, so you can access it in the chat function. In today's session, we're also going to hear from our Executive Director, Catherine Murphy, who will be sharing key findings and details from the report, Sex and Power in Scotland 2023. My brilliant colleague, Lucy Hughes, Engender's Policy and Parliamentary Manager, will be taking us through two Mentimeter activities, one at the start of the session and one towards the end. We're also going to hear from three fantastic feminist leaders based here in Scotland, Jade Galbraith, Pheona, Matovu and Suzanne Motherwell. We're also going to hear from the wider Engender team in an organisational highlights section of the agenda, a short section, but more on that later. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the session, we'll come to questions and discussions. So as I said, please add your questions to the Q&A function. Over now to our Executive Director, Catherine Murphy, to take us through the report and the key findings from the report.
Hello, everyone. Jade, if you can just share my slides, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So I'll just start just very quickly while Jade's doing that. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to talk you through the headline findings of the report. I won't be able to get into detail on every area that we surveyed, but I will touch on as many as I can before handing over to the fantastic speakers that we have joining us, who can hopefully also give us a bit of a closer look at the issues at play in their sectors across business, education and transport. Before I do that, I just want to briefly touch on the background and purpose of Sex and Power. So this report follows on from previous editions in 2017 and 2020. For the most part, we've tried to track progress across that time frame using the same categories and methodologies in each edition. This work was originally inspired by a similar series done by the Equality and Human Rights Commission between 2003 and 2011, and work by the Counting Women Coalition. We took the decision to extend this and focus specifically on Scotland because we felt there was a lack of data and a lack of detailed attention on this issue. I also just very quickly want to thank Laura Jones, who was the researcher who worked with us on this report. So Jade, if you want to move to the next slide. There we go. So why is this report needed? So from our point of view, despite general awareness of issues around women's representation and even a passive, possibly begrudging acceptance that it is a bad thing, we don't feel that the scale of the issue and the breadth of the consequences are fully appreciated. International evidence from sources including the World Bank and the UN and others have demonstrated that a lack of gendered power balance in the public sphere has a major impact on equality outcomes across government and in our society. So the positions of power we've identified in this report hold huge sway in determining what our society and culture look like. They dictate who gets heard and who has a seat at the table when key decisions are made. The figures we've gathered show that how the world is shaped around us in Scotland, so how resources are distributed, services are designed and priorities are identified, is still disproportionately decided upon by men. The fact that so many women are missing from these positions of power means that major decision making is taking place without women's leadership and high level input. And this exclusion is even more pronounced for minoritised women, particularly women of colour and disabled women. We still have a great deal of work to do to secure gender equality in Scotland across the labour market, in justice, education, health, media and culture. The lack of women's representation and particularly intersectional feminist leadership in decision-making spaces creates an undertow, holding us all back from progress and impacting the day-to-day lives of women in Scotland. So in collating this data, we hope that we can help underline the stark reality of the situation and highlight the expansive impact this is having on women and girls in Scotland. Next slide. So what we've measured. In the report, we tracked women's representation across 38 categories of authority. So these were the kind of branches of the types of different role that carry huge weight in Scotland in terms of decision making. And we mapped these across 4 arenas of power in Scotland. So that was political institutions. So that included Scottish Parliament, government, local authorities and the UK Parliament. We no longer count MEPs due to Brexit. We also tracked it across the public sector. So that included public bodies, civil service, education, health and social care, transport, justice and trade unions. Media and culture, so we looked at the media sector, arts and sport, and then finally across business. We undertook this research in December last year and in January this year, so it represents a snapshot in time. We also, following changes in the Scottish Government and the leadership of the Scottish Government in March, we updated the statistics around the Cabinet and the resulting changes throughout the political system. So it has been updated to take account of those changes. So next slide, please. So just to briefly touch on the methodological limitations of our approach. So Scottish level data isn't always accessible. It can be hard to delineate from UK sources. The list of categories we use is not necessarily fully comprehensive. So to give an example, across justice, we don't count every lawyer, for example, in Scotland, or every top barrister, but we do try and pick a critical mass of roles that can help us paint a picture that is indicative of broad patterns of women's representation across Scotland. It's also important to be transparent that a small number of personnel might have changed since we initially counted this data, so there may have been some small changes since we did the initial sweep. So one of the major areas that we need to be transparent about is the limitations in the data in the area of intersectionality. The report counts the number of women and men employed in key decision-making positions of power. We did this by using existing up-to-date data sets, pulling publicly available information and cross-referencing where we could. But the information didn't give us enough on other aspects of individuals' identities to allow us to do an intersectional breakdown. So how many individuals in these posts are LGBTI, have a disability, what their age range is, or whether they were from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. But we know that women facing intersectional discrimination are less likely to be promoted to positions of power and are more likely to face discrimination and harassment in the workplace. So this makes it highly likely that minoritised women are even more severely underrepresented in positions of power identified in this report. We also know that one-size-fits-all approaches to increasing women's representation rarely serves women from minoritised groups, and as such disproportionately benefits non-disabled, middle-class, cis heterosexual white women. In the absence of better data, we've tried throughout the report to provide analysis of the intersections between racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, etc., and want to make clear that we understand that women's experiences are not uniform. Next slide. Thanks, Jade. So one of the things that we wanted to use as a framing for today's discussion is around feminist leadership, because we really recognise the importance of it. And our speakers will elaborate a bit more on this. But we know that women's representation is crucial, but it alone won't guarantee leadership. that prioritises systems change to bring about equality, particularly for minoritized women, increasing the amount and diversity of women represented in public life, and working to eradicate barriers to participation are critical steps in the journey towards gender equality. But building feminist leadership among decision makers, both men and women, is also vital. It's also a vital part of the picture to ensure that the work that is done in these spaces actually breaks down biases and structural inequalities that hold gender inequality in place. This is just a little diagram from a wonderful piece of work by an organisation called Gender at Work, and it's their analytical framework, breaking down some of the dimensions of feminist leadership and what can limit feminist leadership. Just moving on to the next slide. So I just want to take you very briefly through the headline findings. So we looked at nearly 3,400 individual roles. Women held just over 1,200 of these. This means that 64% of the positions that we looked at were held by men and 36% were held by women. This reflects a marginal increase in women's representation of approximately 5% since we did this exercise in 2020. But around 472 women are still missing from positions of authority in Scotland. Men were significantly overrepresented in 33 of the 38 categories that we examined, and only 5 areas demonstrated at least 50% of women in leadership positions. This is despite women making up 50% of Scotland's population, 49% of its labour market, and girls routinely leaving school with higher levels of educational attainment on average. Just moving on to the next slide. So in terms of areas where we did see some improvement, and I'll go into greater depth on this, we have noticed some progress in political institutions. We saw some marginal improvements across most of the areas surveyed, with the exception of Westminster. In the public sector, we saw positive developments in the health sector, in particular some incremental change in transport and in trade unions. In media and culture, we saw a small increase in editors of major newspapers and some chief executives of national sports bodies. Next slide, please. There remains overrepresentation in senior positions across all of those fields, however, and in many cases, improvement in the percentages represents a marginal increase in the number of women rather than a major step change. In the business sector, for example, improvement in representation reflects the achievements of 1 or 2 individuals in a space that's almost exclusively dominated by men. We also notice large and disparate differences across the country. So for example, in local government, there are wide variations in representation in local authorities. So the areas where we've seen limited progress or even regression, there are very few women that are political editors of major newspapers. The report says that there's 0. We've had some news this morning that may be incorrect, so we're just checking our methodology. So just be aware that there might be corrections to come on that one. But if there are very, very small numbers. All national broadcasters are headed by men. Only 2 women are CEOs of FTSE 100 and 200 companies in Scotland, and only a quarter of the heads of transport bodies and judges at the Supreme Court are women. Next slide, please. So the areas that had the lowest representation, these are included across the court system. They included senior police officers, and CEOs of top businesses. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you a bit of a closer look at some of this. And we'll have a look at the political institutions where we have seen some increase. So if you look at the figures that we're reporting among MSPs and local councillors, we have seen steady increase, but they are pretty small numbers. So we now have 46% of MSPs are women, but still only 35% of local councillors are women. you know, particularly around local authorities. Local authorities deliver and fund vital services. And they're a key pipeline to national public office. So the pace of change for women's representation in local council remains extremely slow. And as I said, it's very varied across Scotland. So it's as low as 7% in the Western Isles and 11% in South Ayrshire, whilst we see some progress in areas including West Lothian that now has 48% women, and the Scottish Borders has doubled the amount of women that are councillors since we started measuring in 2017. Next slide. Five councillors now have fewer women than they did in 2017, and nationally only a quarter of council leaders are women, which is demonstrated in the table in the slide. In the Scottish Government in April 2023, following the change in political leadership, the First Minister appointed the first cabinet that has over 50% women, and this builds on successive gender balance cabinets since 2014. But our data indicates that this gender balance is not matched across special advisors, so SPADs within Scottish Government, with almost 2/3 of them being men. And they hold significant sway in terms of internal decision making within government. Next slide. To anybody who saw the panorama last night on sexual harassment and bullying at Westminster, these figures will come as no surprise. Westminster retains its reputation as a boys' club with archaic working practices. So we have only 32% of MPs for Scottish constituencies are women, 19 women compared to 40 men. Next slide. So I just wanted to also have a closer look at the public sector. I'm not going to go into depth in these areas. Suffice to say that these bodies set policy, deliver services, administer justice, and safeguard the rights of a huge range of areas that impact women's life. Also, they're often areas where we see a majority female workforce. And we see pronounced, so that we therefore see pronounced issues of vertical occupational segregation. So we have huge female workforces, but very small numbers represented in senior positions. The overall percentage of women leading public bodies in Scotland has decreased by around 1% since 2020. The Scottish Parliament has passed the Gender Representation of Public Boards Bill and set a quota for women on public boards as 50%. So we're hopeful that this will bring about much needed change. Next slide. In the civil service, all the leadership roles we looked at fell short of gender parity. The gender balance of the Scottish Government Strategic Board has declined for the second time since their initial report in 2017. Local authority chief executives posts have seen a drop in women's representation since 2020 from 50 to 47%. This is despite women making up 71% of the local government workforce. Next slide. Oh, sorry, still on that slide. So just to quickly look at health and social care, we have seen some interesting developments in health and social care. Women currently make up 48% of health service chief executives compared to only 30% in 2020. However, that means that 52% of health boards are led by male chief executives, despite men only making up 23% of the overall NHS workforce. Next slide. I realise I'm running out of time, so I'll be very quick, but our research has shown that the justice sector is one of the least representative spheres of public life in Scotland. Only a quarter of our most senior judicial office holders, senators of the College of Justice, are women. The overwhelming majority of criminal and civil court cases in Scotland are presided over by men. They make up 2/3 of sheriff's principal and 78% of sheriffs. There has been limited progress within Police Scotland since 2020, with women now accounting for 4 of the 18 most senior roles, compared with only with 2 in 2017. So we've seen an increase in 2 since 2017. Women make up 32% of officer level staff within the police, but only 22% of senior leadership. Next slide. I'm not going to say too much about media and culture because we are going to do some more targeted work on this in the coming months, and we'll have more publications coming on this. But suffice to say that men continue to dominate the media and creative industries in the UK. Marginal progress has been made in Scottish newspapers, with 3 women in post as editors of major papers, compared to just 1 in 2020 and 0 in 2017. Women of colour are routinely underrepresented in Scottish news and at heightened risk of the harassment that many women face. In the arts, the proportion of women leading museums and galleries has increased to 43%. From 16% in 2020, so that's really encouraging. However, the number of women heading production companies has remained unchanged since 2020, as is the number of women directors of national arts and culture bodies. Men's overrepresentation persists at 75% of leadership positions in these sectors. Next slide. So that's just the data that is in the report around the media and the arts. Next slide, Jade. So just to touch on, and I hope our conversation will address this a bit more, but men continue to make the majority of the decisions in the public realm in Scotland, and we need to talk more about some of the things that can actually make a difference. The things that we think can make a difference are targeted resources, meaningful equality, diversity, inclusion within organisations. The legislation on public boards is really welcome, but we potentially have to go further in terms of possible quotas around women's representation in politics. Flexible and hybrid working offers huge potential, and we need much more and better data collection, and hopefully some of these things will help build us towards the systems change, the overall systems change that's needed. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry for the racing through this, but I hope that you can read through the report in more detail and take more time over the various stats that are in there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kat. Hugely valuable. Of course, we will circulate a link to the report as well after the event, so you have that. Please do bob any questions in the Q&A function. I do sometimes call it the Q&A chat function, so apologies for any confusion there, but it is the Q&A. So if you have any questions at all, please do bob them in. And of course, you can contact us on Twitter and via email and so on. I'm going to pass over now back to my colleague Maxine, and fingers crossed we've cleared up those issues with the audio and we'll be able to hear from Minister Roddick. So Max, when you're ready, I'll hand back over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Emma Roddick. I'm the Minister for Equalities, Migration and Refugees. I'm really sorry not to have been able to be with you today at the launch of this report, particularly because as a woman in politics, I am all too aware that we still have unequal access to power, to decision making and to participation throughout all areas of public life. Institutional and cultural change is needed, and at a large scale, to shift that dial. Only 2 women are CEOs of FTSE 100 and 250 companies in Scotland. Fewer than 25% of sheriffs, senior police officers and temporary judges at Supreme Courts are women. There is some good news. Of course, Scottish political institutions like local councils and the Scottish Parliament have seen an increase in women over the most recent elections. In Holyrood, we've seen 2 women of colour elected as MSPs, and we've had more disabled women elected in 2021 than ever before, myself included. The Scottish Government is determined to support that progress, and that's why we provide funding to organisations like Elect Her, which supported 54 women in the 2022 local government elections, 27 of whom went on to win seats. We support the Young Women Lead programme, which provides a safe space for up to 100 young women under 30 to explore gender equality and develop new and innovative ways to lead change. We funded Engender too, of course, to support a development manager post in Gender Equal Media Scotland, and for its Equal Representation project. Now, the findings from Engender's report, which you're all here to launch, can easily feel dispiriting and frustrating. There is no easy fix to the issues that we're all facing and which this report lays bare. But change is necessary and it is possible. That first requires being honest with ourselves. I talked there about the improvements in the numbers of women in public life, but we need to look at the retention of those women and tackle the drivers of their early resignations or their lack of interest in standing for election a second time. Our success also has to be intersectional. Progress for some groups of women but not others is not representation. This is a challenge that I'm sure we have the collective knowledge, passion and drive to achieve together. So I just want to finish by thanking Engender for holding us all to account in this way and encouraging that continued ambition to improve gender equality in Scotland. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the event and I look forward to seeing many of you soon as we continue our shared fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Minister Roddick for taking the time to record that message for us. We really value the time. And also I know there are members of Minister Roddick's office on the call today, so thank you for the support. I'll pass over now to my colleague Lucy, who's going to run us through the first half of a two-part Mentimeter activity. Details of how to join the Menti are going to be posted in the function chat directly to you, and they'll also be up on the screen. So Lucy, over to you.
Thanks, Jade. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen just now. And if you just look in the chat, you should see joining instructions for how to access this Menti. So you can also use your phone or any device you have available and just type in menti.com and the code at the top of the screen, which is 4142244. And there should also be a link to just click straight onto the Menti. So the first question we really wanted to ask you to reflect on was thinking about what Kat has spoken through, what we've heard from Minister Roddick. What words would you use to describe feminist leadership? So this could be within your own life, what you see across political institutions, the impact that feminist leadership could have. And as you submit your answers, they'll just pop up in a nice word cloud that we can watch just for a minute or so. There's some brilliant responses already: compassionate, inclusive, powerful, radical, empowering, brave, lots of kind of words around courage and bravery, strong, balanced, and collaborative. There's so many popping up on the screen. Just for time, please keep adding to them, but I'm going to move us on to the next question, and we'll also be able to share these answers with you after the session if you want a bit of inspiration or want to look at these in more detail. So the next question: how do you currently practice feminist leadership in your own life? So you don't have to be a chief exec, you don't have to run a newspaper, you don't even have to be a manager. You can have feminist leadership across any role, whether that's in your personal life, where you volunteer, in your workplace. Share any kind of reflections you have of how you show feminist leadership or you feel that you practice it. And again, we're all on different journeys with this, so it's not that we all need to kind of have the perfect answers, but we're really interested to hear any reflections you might have on what does it mean to you in your personal life. Really interesting, there's some around listening, lots of ones about listening, challenging stereotypes and organising for women's involvement and representation. Sharing power, that's really interesting. So if you're already in a really kind of senior position or you've sort of made it to the job which you wanted, how can you bring others with you? Mentoring others, so sharing skills. And again, promoting work-life balance and flexibility, which we heard a lot about across the presentation. Always pointing out inequality, skill sharing, and learning from other feminist leaders. And that's such an important message. Making sure others feel heard in group settings. Building community, centering women. There's so many great examples here. And again, fantastic to hear your reflections. So just because of time, we're now going to pass back over to Jade, and she's going to introduce some of our panelists, but this is going to stay open, so feel free to keep adding your reflections throughout kind of the presentations, and we're going to come back for another little Menti exercise in just a bit. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Gosh, I wish we could sort of sit for at least 5-10 minutes doing that. I noted down radical kindness as a response to that first question. Absolutely love that. And as Lucy mentioned, we'll circulate those responses post-event, the Mentimeter results to you. I'm really delighted now to introduce our speakers from sectors which experience particular gender imbalances: education, transport and business, which is highlighted in the report. They each offer a unique and hugely valuable perspective as feminist leaders based here in Scotland. So our first speaker, I first came across Jackie Galbraith's writing online while I was researching Ada Lovelace, and I found a blog that Jackie had written about women in computing. Jackie is principal of West Lothian College and holds inclusivity and feminist leadership at the heart of what they do. We're really delighted to welcome Jackie today, and thank you so much for making the time, Jackie, to join us. So without further ado, Jackie, over to you.
Thanks, Jade, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar this morning. My personal and professional interests arise from being a very lonely woman in tech back in the late 1980s, and now as a woman in the college sector in the last 5 years at West Lothian College. So having read the report, I mean, I think it's an extremely valuable report, but I was asking myself the question, why is it we need to be reminded of how we're doing on sex and power in this day and age? And I think it's because of the findings of your report, which are absolutely critical for all of us to understand. But it's also because of the findings of other reports that continue to be published. For example, last year's McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report gave very comprehensive detail about recommendations about how we could actually address that in the workplace. Just this month, the House of Commons reported on attitudes towards women and girls in educational settings, and it was alarming about the level of sexual harassment that takes place for young girls and women and employees in educational sectors. And of course, again, I think just this month, the Scottish Women's Budget Group also published a report on its survey on the experiences of rising costs across Scotland and the impact that has particularly on women. And of course, another critical reason for reports, why your report's so important, is because there's still a job to do. And I was pleased to hear the Minister say that. So just, Jade mentioned my background, just look at the tech sector. There are fewer women in tech roles, including leadership, than when I was a student nearly over 3 decades ago. Despite a wave of 30 years of initiatives trying to attract more women into computing, that sector is still overwhelmingly male, and the implications of that I think are quite serious, but we haven't cracked it. And I'll maybe talk a little bit about why we think that's the case. Because there's an interesting story there, because women dominated computer programming right up until the 1980s, the mid-1980s, but something happened. And there's a lot of theories about what happened in terms of the introduction of the personal computer, video games and so on. But what happened essentially is that men became much more interested in that sector and very quickly began to dominate a sector that had previously had a large proportion of women in it. So my point about all of that is, until we understand the cultural and power dynamics in a sector like tech, little will change. And I get very frustrated about that, which is why I end up writing blogs like Jade talked about in terms of computing. But I must admit, I didn't really know what feminist leadership was. So when I was invited to speak this morning, I did have a look. I Googled, of course, what is feminist leadership? And it wasn't a term I was familiar with until I was invited to speak. And what I realized was that my understanding of good leadership chimes exactly with the principles of feminist leadership. And I came across an organization called the Coalition of Feminists for Social Change, who described feminist leadership as creative, collaborative leadership that is inherently intersectional and creates spaces where everyone can exercise their agency and realise their potential. And they confirmed what Catherine said, that anyone can be a feminist leader. And in my career, which is quite long now, I have seen fantastic male feminist leaders and female feminist leaders, and I've seen some really poor male and poor female leaders. So I think anyone can be a feminist leader is really important. I agree with that, especially if the leadership style adopts key tenets, as the coalition talks about, of accountability, collaboration, diversity of thought, empathy, self and community care, balance of power and transparency. And when I read the report, I was disappointed to see that women continue to be underrepresented in leadership roles in education, especially when the associated workforces, for example, in the school sector, are overwhelmingly female. So it made me take time to reflect on the college sector, my own college, but also the wider college sector. So just to give you some facts, at West Lothian College, we have 360 staff, 71% of whom are female. And in terms of our leadership structure, leadership and management structure, 75% of our senior leaders are female and 75% of our managers are female. So in terms of leadership in our college, we are following the demographic of our workforce. I wouldn't say deliberately, but we're following that. But in the wider college sector, in 21-22, which is the latest staffing figures published by the Scottish Funding Council, 61% of staff in the college sector were female, 54.5% were senior managers, 58% were principals. And it's disappointing in the report to see that that percentage of principals in the college sector has declined fairly significantly since then to below 50%, which for me is disappointing. And I think that there's a really critical point in there about needing to keep sighted on where we're going with all of this, which is why reports like Sex and Power are so important, because you can miss these things unless you keep track of them, and then unless you actually start to address them. So for me, in my sector, the college sector and the tech sector, or whatever sector we're talking about, it's critical to feed and continue to feed the pipeline of women to make sure that there's enough interest and opportunities in management and leadership positions across the piece. As far as West Lothian College is concerned, in November 2020, during the pandemic, we had an all-staff online conference, which was followed by lots of online group activities, and we set new strategic goals. And one of those strategic goals, just 4 of them, fairly straightforward, but one of them was to lead with vision and empathy. And that was a goal for everybody in the organisation. The vision part was about, having the opportunity to be innovative, creative, do the job to the best of your ability. But the empathy bit was about sharing different perspectives, making sure that people had a value of diverse ideas and so on. And the organisation has really embraced that strategic goal, and that really dominates our culture, along with other things that feed off of that in terms of trauma responsive practice. So we continue to make efforts in that, because organisations don't stand still, and it's very easy for things to creep up and you don't expect. So we place a lot of value in external assessment of the organisation to make sure that we know how well we're doing. And it's why, for example, we invest in investors and people. We achieved gold last year, but we want to achieve platinum, not to get the badge, not because I want to brag about being an investors and people platinum organisation, but because it shows me as an employer, we are improving on making work better for everybody who works for us, and that includes our leaders. We have just recently been accredited as a disability confident leader, the only college or university in Scotland to be so, and that shows that we are improving in how we are recruiting and retaining disabled people into our workforce. And we're on a journey right now from LGBT Charter Silver to Gold status to show that as an employer that we are absolutely cited and effecting change for those who are LGBT in our workforce. So things can change, but they need persistent effort. College boards, the gender balance in college boards has changed. Largely because of the government expecting there to be gender balance. So our own board is 50-50 gender balance. But 3 years ago, our board had no non-executive board members who were from ethnic minority groups. And we agreed as a board that wasn't acceptable. So we made a proactive effort over those years to change that. And we now have 3 board members from ethnic minority backgrounds, including 2 women. So from 0 to 25% of non-executive board members in less than 3 years shows that things can change, but it needs collective, persistent effort across the organisation. And that's why reports like Sex and Power are so important. They shine a light on injustice, inequity, underrepresentation. But the critical point about reports like Sex and Power is it's for all of us then to act. If we don't act on the knowledge that we gain from these reports, then we will continue to have this underrepresentation as we go forward. So thanks again for inviting me to speak. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other speakers and to seeing the feedback from those that are participating. It's a really important report, and I thank you for my engagement in this morning's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's really great to hear from you. I really appreciate you coming along today, and completely agree with you on that element about collective, persistent energy and genuine action, you know, and great to hear about some of the practical examples that you're doing at West Lothian at the moment. If you have any questions for Jackie, please do put them in the Q&A function and we'll collate them at the end. I'm really delighted now to introduce our second feminist leader and speaker, Pheona Matovu. Pheona is Strategic Director of Radiant and Brighter, an organisation she founded after experiencing years of unemployment as a result of immigration controls and gaps in employment support provision here in Scotland. Her work aims to bridge the gap between the needs of the growing BME refugee and migrant communities and existing support provision in Scotland. So Pheona, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Jade. And thank you for inviting me to speak. I was thinking about the invite and the theme, sex and power. Initially, I thought, yes, I'd like to speak at that. And then I thought, if my mom actually read that, she'd be mortified. I'm not sure. I come from a culture where we speak about sex like that. And then I thought, actually, when we speak about, probably people still get a similar reaction if we spoke about Black woman, sex, power in the same sentence. And so it really made me reflect and it really made me think. But thank you for inviting me. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about my own journey and the journey of other women like myself. When we started Radiant and Brighter, many of the aspects you've spoken about in terms of the challenges that we still have, I was thinking, I did not think about whether there were other women in business. I just thought I need to start because first and foremost, the system did not appreciate anything that I brought. I had been in long-term unemployment about 5 years because of immigration controls. I had skills. I had been training staff members in big organizations. But the moment I started to look for work, I was hit with, oh, you were not the kind of person that we want. I remember going to an employment agency just to register, to say, could I register with you so that I can start to look for employment? A big one, which I will not mention, but it was in the city centre of Glasgow. And I got there and they did not even look at me. And they just said, sorry, we can't register you. And I remember thinking, do I argue with this or do I walk away? And the best thing for me was to walk away. It was safer. It was more, at the time, it's just what I needed to do. And when we are talking about women in business and we're talking about sex and power, I'm cautious that for women of color, for migrant women, for minoritized women, you may even have the role and still not have the power. So you may be in a position that is completely powerless, other than the fact that you've been given that role to fulfill certain responsibilities, which will probably not be appreciated, skills which are often not acknowledged. In 2018, I got to a stage where I realized we'd set up Radiant and Brighter because we wanted other people who had experiences like ours to find employment, to get into business, which we still do. And I remember getting to a stage where I realized that even we as an organization did not have enough women. And worse still, when I went to places, big events where there were about 400 people, 200 people, I found myself to be the only woman of color in the room. And I remember thinking, I need to do something. And we applied for a fund and got the opportunity to work with women. And with this fund, we were supposed to work with about 15 women over 18 months that would be able to get into the public space. And I remember in that time, it was such an exciting piece of work. I just thought I could get out and go with other women and we could all be present in a particular room. And it wasn't long before we realized, within 2 months, we had about 30 women. By the time we got to the 4th, 5th, 6th month, we had about 60 women. And we had the opportunity to say, oh, we'll only work with just 15 women. But we couldn't turn down the women that were inviting each other. And some of the things that we did to allow for that to happen, there was peer engagement, there was peer support, there was shared learning space. It was a safe space for everybody to share their experiences, their journeys. And more importantly, for those that had children, we had childcare. So they could put their children in a room and come and know that the children are safe and they're doing something in another room. And it allowed us that time to work with 120 women over a period of 18 months. Those women we are still connected with. We have groups in which they continue to participate. But what I want to share about that is that the women that I wondered where they were, even myself, I realized they just needed a process and something that would allow them to be equal participants within our economy, within our society. Indeed, some of them set up businesses which are now recognized by our ecosystem. And thinking about the report and hearing and looking at the fact that 7% of women are CEOs in Scotland, that is challenging. And especially challenging because, again, when we think deeper and we look at the intersectionality and we're looking at women of color, we're looking at women that are perhaps from different backgrounds, how many of that 7% are from that demographic? We know that the demographics in Scotland have changed. And have we changed? Have we done what we need to do to ensure that we are benefiting from diversity? We all know that diversity leads to increased innovation, increased productivity, but do we believe that? And again, there is a lot that we need to think about, but two things that I will ask to, one of the things I'll leave you with and another that will be a call to action. The first is that when we are talking about women, often we talk about how we support women and how we get women engaged. But we need to think about the systems and how the systems operate and how the systems have worked towards closing out women and challenging and making it difficult for women to actually engage. I know that right now, I'm speaking to women of color who have worked in sectors, in business, in different areas, some who have not set up businesses, but sought to work within the ecosystem, and they're pushed out, and they often come out and choose to be, they are now choosing to be consultants because it is safer, because you know that at least in that environment, you can choose where you go, especially when you're facing racism. And so as we seek to increase inclusivity and we seek to appreciate the value that women bring to our society and our economy, we need to think about how we address intercultural competence and how we address anti-racism. As an organization, we started off supporting women into employment, business startup, and quickly realized we needed to do something with the system. And so we started to deliver intercultural competence and anti-racism training. And sometimes we're faced with, oh, but that's quite negative, talking about anti-racism. Actually, it's not. Because what is the option? What is the opposite to it? And the opposite to it is racism. There's no neutral position you're either racist or anti-racist. Either your system is or it is not. Either it benefits and includes or does not include. Either it creates equality or does not, or creates inequality. And so my call to action as I finish is, if you haven't considered yet, you need to consider this. And if you're speaking about it, you need to reflect on it. And so we've been called to speak about feminist leadership today and to have that conversation. My call to action is, could we start speaking about intersectional feminist leadership? And the reason I call you to action for that is because for those that haven't spoken about it, haven't engaged with it, we need to. But for those that have engaged with it, I'd like to remind you that intersectionality has its origins in Black feminism. It actually refers to the idea that Black women experience class, race, and sex exploitation simultaneously. And it has grown to include other forms of intersectionality and the way we think about other forms of oppression, inequality. And so when we think about intersectionality, think about how the depth of that. We cannot speak about it when we cannot speak about the duality, the intersecting aspects of oppression to women and to women of different and diverse backgrounds. So we cannot speak about intersectionality when we are speaking about just one form of discrimination, or when we are speaking about just women, white women. We need to be speaking about women of color, women that experience disability, and all other forms of oppression. And so could we now be speaking about intersectional feminist power and leadership?
Thank you so much, Pheona. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we could not agree with you more on the importance of an intersectional approach and embedding that intersectional approach into practical practices. Thank you so much. If anyone would like to find out more about Pheona's work, you can visit radiantandbrighter.com online. And if you have any questions, please do bob them in the Q&A and we'll come to them at the end. Thank you so much, Pheona. I am delighted now to pass us on to our third and final speaker of today's session. I'm really delighted to introduce you to Suzanne Motherwell, who works within Transport Analytical Services at Transport Scotland. While they offer expertise in the current transport landscape, Suzanne has also offers a wealth of experience and has worked within the women's sector here in Scotland. We are delighted to welcome you, Suzanne. Over to you when you are ready.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me today to talk at the launch of Sex and Power. As Jade, as you'd mentioned, I work in Transport Scotland in Transport Analytical Services, and I'm a principal social researcher there who are kind of support sort of policy development and implementation in the Scottish Government. And just for a bit of context, Transport Scotland is the agency responsible for delivering transport policy and programmes from a range of like road safety to walking and cycling initiatives to tackling kind of initiatives around climate emissions. And one of the key aspects I love about my job is that everyone has an opinion on transport, and that makes what I do as a social researcher really interesting. I'm interested in how and why people travel and why some people have more choice than others, and it makes it much, much easier. But this morning, just reflecting on the other speakers talking about feminist leadership, I thought I would reflect on a piece of research work that I was fortunate to work on recently. And it touches on some aspects of feminist leadership, and it was kind of critical in shaping the outcome of this work. And also, I wasn't really sure what feminist leadership was. So I'll talk you through this example, and maybe you can tell me if that's an example of feminist leadership of me doing my job. But I think it'll reflect on some aspects of it. So let's just consider the context in which I work. As part of our commitment to reduce inequality, Scotland's National Transport Strategy does sort of point to the importance of recognising women's different and often unmet needs in relation to transport. And I know that Engender and others on the call will be well aware of some of the barriers and issues that women face accessing and using transport system in Scotland. And as Sex and Power report indicated, transport is a male-dominated sector. And the kind of stat that you were talking about is the sort of quarter of heads of transport authorities are women. And it's that kind of disciplines that shape the transport system, and engineering, planning, urban design are also male-dominated. So there has been some progress, as Sex and Power report points to, that from 2020, we've kind of moved from 2 heads of transport authorities were women to now 4. So there is some progress. But I'll give you a bit of an insight into some of my work and how I kind of try and use my position to influence some of the outcomes for women and girls in the transport system. So we know that there's a persistent gender bias that shapes the transport outcomes for women and girls, where gender is often considered as an afterthought, and the different needs accepted simply as a reflection of societal expectations of women and girls rather than a kind of system for change. So, and Engender is reflected in this in the Gender Matters Roadmap that highlighted the impact of the position of women and girls' mobility is curtailed, affects access to jobs, health services, social leisure activities, etc., etc. So there's some evidence out there about the kind of disparate impact of gender inequality in the transport system. So in Transport Scotland, in the Scottish Government, as a principal social researcher, I have some influence, as much as you can in the civil service, to shape sort of thinking analysis in relation to transport policy. And as a feminist, for me, it's a no-brainer that my analytical approach is always through a feminist lens. And that lens is about the consistent collection analysis of gender disaggregated data and using it to try and set the kind of insightful research questions and evaluation questions that will further improve the kind of policy outcomes of our work. So I'm going to reflect on an example today where I tried to, I think, I did influence the outcome of a piece of work. And I'll talk through this with you and you can ask me some questions. So when Scotland's first female transport minister, Jade, announced as a priority that she wanted to consult women and girls about personal safety of public transport, for me, it was clear this was an excellent opportunity to undertake a valuable piece of feminist research. And as I've said, try and nudge the dial, improve women and girls' experience accessing a transport system in Scotland. And in my role, in my small way, I hoped I could try and do that. So to put this a wee bit in context of my personal kind of background, so as a feminist and as a researcher, I studied geography and planning, and most of my professional career is centred around the issues of equalities and social justice. I've worked in various different charities and sectors, looking at kind of LGBT equality, looking at the gender pay gap, looking at kind of gender inequality in transport. And as you know, much of the subsequent legislation in the 21st century has been to try and right the exclusion of women and girls from formal workplaces, from education, from financial independence, from travelling unaccompanied in public, from all aspects of public everyday life. And this is where the kind of transport sits as a specific space it kind of operates, and where this work, a work that was announced by the Minister, had to be considered as part of a kind of strategy to tackle kind of violence against women and girls. So using my position in Transport Scotland, I was trying to make the case for a research programme rather than a public consultation process. So the Minister announced she wanted to consult, and a lot of civil service would think, a consultation, we have to do a consultation. But I knew instinctively that was not what we needed to do here, and we needed to try and help influence the decision-making process accordingly and shift and pivot some of the decision makers thinking around from a public consultation into a focused, qualitative, in-depth engagement, and start to add to that rich lived experience of women and girls in Scotland, and making sure that policy reflected that. And in particular as well, looking at female transport workers, and from what I knew, that voice was missing from the literature. So I knew a public consultation was the wrong tool at this point to generate that evidence, and we needed to do something much more insightful and much more feminist. And I knew that there was some pushback around qualitative research, and it's a sort of sometimes seen as, because it's not representative, you're not talking to all women in Scotland. And I'm like, yes, but it provides such a rich, diverse experience. It's about the lived experience. And I knew in this context of transport and personal safety, there'd be a commonality of experience. Every single one of you on this call will have made some kind of adjustment to your travel around the fears or expectations of accessing public transport or getting out into public space. So I knew that there's likely that there'd be a commonality of experience that would be excellent. So that was the kind of first point of influence, trying to shape the design of the research and shift it from a kind of big survey, a consultation, into a much more focused piece of work and talking to women and girls in Scotland. And the second point, I suppose, I was trying to influence was around making sure the work remained focused on the experiences of women and girls, and ensure we captured that diversity of experience. I was aware there was an existing evidence that women were disproportionately affected by personal safety issues in public transport, where women adapted their behaviour to feel safer, such as travelling, coming at night, or choosing to travel with private car instead. And as such, the research is designed to try and reflect this. So what we're talking about, the population group we're talking about, we want to speak to, we need to focus on that group and undertake a piece of specifically designed research. And again, I was preparing myself for the pushback, but what about men and boys' experience? Why are we not asking them about their experience? And, you know, again, it's that sort of thing. Well, this piece of work is about women and girls. And anything we do here, any of the outcomes will not have a detrimental impact on the ability of men. In fact, it'll probably end up being a kind of more, it'll make a kind of access and using public transport a more positive experience for both women and men. So there's that kind of context. And also, there was the issue of, okay, but why can we not just do a piece of work on antisocial behaviour and then talk to women and girls as part of that? Like, well, that would probably, a broader piece of antisocial behaviour on public transport, if you focus on that, we'll miss the gendered nature of accessing and using public transport. We'll miss the detail around personal safety, perceptions, fear of crime, that day-to-day experience, that journey planning that a lot of women undertake in order to just move around the city, move around their community. And by focusing on women and girls, I knew we wouldn't miss issues around antisocial behaviour, because women and girls would talk about antisocial behaviour. But if we did it the other way, we'd definitely miss that kind of gendered perspective. And again, it wouldn't then become a kind of feminist piece of research, if that makes sense. So that was the kind of influence around the design and the focus. And the next part was really about me kind of building on my connections through my work. So I've worked in many different organisations, and that really helped me map out the sort of stakeholders we need to be talking to about this work. And I'd worked with Engender on pieces of work prior to working in Transport Scotland. Again, another piece around transport and active travel. And I knew it was essential we met with Engender to discuss the issues in our approach and specifically talk about some of their insights around the Gender Matters roadmap. And it was partly to, thankfully Kat and Jill were happy to meet with us. It was partly to kind of help validate our approach. Again, trying to build those connections and build that kind of case for doing this piece of work. And luckily, the Minister for Transport, the former Minister for Transport, was also quite keen to meet with Engender as well. So that proved to be critical in terms of shaping this work. And we went on to engage with lots of other stakeholders as well, part as the scoping process, but also as an event at the end of the research process to help finalise the draft recommendations. And this latter point was really important because it was we had to make it really clear. I knew from the outset in designing this work that the responsibility for making changes is a structural one, and it's not a responsibility of women and girls, because as we look at the findings of the research, we'll see that there's a number of strategies that women and girls take in order to be safe and feel safer when moving around the city or moving around their communities. So we had to make sure that we engaged stakeholders like local authorities, like regional transport bodies, or representative groups like the Mobility and Access Committee Scotland, etc., in that kind of space to help shape the recommendations. And what we ended up with, recommendations that are much more structural and about changing institutions' practices in order to support women and girls' mobility. And internally, we also reached out to Violence Against Women and Girls team, and I found a few more feminists in government, which was excellent. People I had worked with in the sector who now worked in government, so that's always a bonus. And they were delighted to help support us with this work, and we still remain in contact with them. So I think in terms of the connections internally and externally were critical. I hope that some of my experience working in kind of areas of equalities and justice helped do that. So in terms of where we ended up with this work, the kind of outcomes were that we did do an evidence review, which again is really critical to sort of make the case that there is a lack of Scottish specific data. And that was the point Kat was making at the start. There is a kind of missing data around women's lived and girls' lived experience, in particular in transport. So we wanted to get underneath the stats, because we do consistently collect gender disaggregated data, but we're not always very good at, I'm not sure I'm supposed to say this, so I'm not always very good at kind of using it and using it effectively. And a lot of that's around time and resource, but we need to get better at doing that. So this piece of work was really critical. So we had the evidence review, and we also were able to answer, sort of add in a couple of questions to an existing survey, which helped sort of give those data points and helped kind of alleviate some concerns around focusing on an in-depth qualitative study. So we were able to get some data points around personal safety and antisocial behaviour in public transport, sort of contextualise some of our qualitative work. And then the substantive piece, as I said, was the in-depth qualitative study. And we spoke to 35 women and girls from a diverse range of backgrounds, ranging in age from 14 to 86. And I think what's really compelling about this is it's really difficult to ignore the personal testimony detailed in this study and the commonality of experience expressed by the women and girls in this work. And of course, it's had a very public dissemination, which has been fantastic. I'm not going to go into the findings today because I don't have time. I think I'm running out of time already. But the full report, I can send that link to Jade, and you can circulate it if you haven't already seen it there. And it's available on our website, but I'll make sure you get copies and can look at it. But if I just can finish off, sorry, the impact of this work, I like to think in terms of the minister announced she wanted to do this work. And we really kind of took the opportunity, and I think my role was really much about trying to steer the kind of design and the outcomes of this work. And it was really critical. And I think, Kat, just reflecting on something I remember you saying to me, that it's okay to spotlight on women and girls' experiences of accessing using public transport. It's okay to do a qualitative study. It's still always part of the mainstreaming agenda. You sometimes need to focus in on something in much detail to really make that kind of case around the kind of mainstreaming and quality agenda. So that was a really wise words, and they kind of stuck with me throughout the process. So we got really positive feedback from the minister. There was a motion put to the Scottish Parliament, and the report and the analysis and the findings was debated on 7th of March. So it's just ahead of International Women's Day 2023. So it's really critical because it's a public record of the research evidence, and it got cross-party support. So we've got that kind of background, social researchers and government doing some work, and it had this really incredible impact. We got really positive responses during the debate. We actually, we've helped internally kind of reposition some people's thinking around personal safety, accessing using public transport, talking to rail colleagues. It feeds into kind of work around antisocial behaviour. And again, this kind of, people are a bit more receptive to using qualitative methodologies as well, which is great. So I've been really surprised, pleasantly surprised by the impact of this work. And I'm delighted that, the women and girls who took the time to tell us about their experiences will hopefully see some progress as this work kind of develops and move into the next phase, which is about actioning some of those recommendations. And just finally, sorry, when initially Jade contacted me and said, do you want to talk about this work? And I said, okay. So talking to Jade at Engender about this work, I was thinking, I don't want to brag, but which she quickly gave me into trouble for saying that. But I think it was rather fortunate that we had our first female transport minister announce this work. And in our service team was a ready-made feminist researcher. So with a little bit of influence. So I think in reflection, I was, kind of really delighted to take this opportunity and just kind of ran with it and try to use what influence I had to shape the work, and use the connections I had to kind of take it forward. And although my colleagues did get it, I think it's quite difficult to take a stand on particular research points, methods or approaches, and kind of having those connections with Engender and other organisations. I think we would have ended up with a different outcome if I'd maybe not been involved, which, yeah, I don't want to brag, but I think, it was just rather fortunate I was there. But I'm hoping that going forward, other people will learn from my experience, and look at that. Sorry, I finished there. Sorry, I was a wee bit longer. Thanks.
That's okay, Suzanne. Thank you so much. That's hugely valuable. Really appreciate your very open and honest reflections there. We've shared the link in the chat to the report you referenced. And yeah, just what you're touching on at the end, I think it's so typical of us to often think, feminist leadership, I don't do that, I'm not that. And it's interesting that each speaker has noted that today in some way. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us. Jackie Galbraith, Pheona Matovu and Suzanne Motherwell we've heard from just now. You've all shared your rich and lived experience, and we hugely value it. Practical examples of lived feminist leadership in reality, and you've also all touched on the real vital importance of intersectionality embedded within these approaches. So thank you all so much for joining us. If anyone has, I can see lots of clap emojis coming up. I very much agree with those. If anyone has any questions, please do continue to bob them in the Q&A function. I'm joined now by a number of my Engender colleagues for a section of the event we're calling Organisational Highlights. I'm aware there's a real wealth of brilliant feminist leadership and feminist organisations joining us, individuals and organisations on the call today. But we thought we'd take a moment to highlight some really great examples or projects of feminist leadership in action in Scotland at the moment. And welcome you to share your ideas. So if today has sparked any ideas of individuals, organisations who you think, yeah, they're doing it well, feminist leadership, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll circulate this list post-event. So I'm going to pass over now to the first of my colleagues who are going to pass around the virtual mic to one another and just give us a brief, quick overview of a feminist organisation in Scotland that's doing feminist leadership well. So over to Lucy first, when you're ready, Lucy.
Hello again, everyone. So the first organisation we'd like to highlight is Stella Quines. So Stella Quines are an intersectional feminist theatre company based here in Scotland. They create shows and provide opportunities and support for career development on stage and also backstage with different creatives at all levels. They also commission research and join forces with others to campaign for change. I'd like to pass on to Hannah for our next organisation.
Thanks, Lucy. My name's Hannah, I'm Policy Officer at Engender, and I'm delighted to be highlighting the Glasgow Disability Alliance today. GDA is a disabled people-led organisation controlled by their 5,500 plus disabled members. They are the largest groundswell of disabled members in Europe and a leading celebrated example of a grassroots community driving improvements to disabled people's lives in parallel with wider changes to policies, services and society. GDA is committed to making space for the vital expertise of those who face multiple intersecting inequalities. They coordinate an LGBT disabled people's space, a BAME members network and a disabled women's network as well. And I'll pass on to Miranda.
Thanks, Anna. Hello, I'm Miranda. I'm the project manager for the Equal Media and Culture Centre here at Engender. So my organisational highlight is the Edinburgh Art Festival. They've recently undergone an 11-month review process under their new leadership of director Kim McAleese, which is fantastic. Intersectionality is very much at the heart of the work that they do, which is so important in the visual arts. And they're currently creating a new equity and inclusion policy, which will be published in the autumn of 2023, so just in a few months from now. So something to be celebrated. I'm passing over to Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel and I'm the Comms and Engagement Officer working on Scotland's Equal Media and Culture Centre. And the organisation I'm highlighting today is Glasgow Women's Library. Glasgow Women's Library hold intersectionality, inclusivity and feminist leadership at their core. Their vision is for a world in which every woman is able to fulfil their potential and where women's historical, cultural and political contributions to society are fully recognised, valued and celebrated. And they offer a hugely diverse range of collections, events and projects. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Trina.
Hi there everybody, I'm Katrina Kirkpatrick, I'm the Head of Development at Engender and the organisation that I'm going to be highlighting is Diverse AI. Diverse AI recently launched in Edinburgh in collaboration with Code Clan with the aim to drive positive change through supporting and growing diversity in the field of AI. They embed intersectional approaches at their core, stating the homogeneity of the field of AI and the wider tech sector is a widely recognised problem and is the root cause of many of the negative impacts of AI. They want to change this. And now I'm going to hand back to our host, Jade.
Thanks so much, Trina. Thank you, everyone at Engender for sharing those organisational highlights with us. If anyone watching today has any ideas for any organisations that you'd like to add to that list, please send them to us. You can send them on Twitter or through our emails, wherever you like, and we'll add them to the list, which will circulate post-event. I'm going to pass back now to Lucy, who's going to take us through the second half of our Mentimeter activity for a few moments before we come to questions and the end.
Hi again, everyone. So if you could click the link again through to Menti, and if you haven't had a chance to engage yet, please do. This is a great opportunity to share any thoughts. What I'd love to hear from everyone about is what has resonated with you so far. So, you know, any key phrases, any concepts that speakers have spoken to throughout their contributions. If you want to use your phone, you can just go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. It's also in the chat function. And again, this will be open after the session, so you can keep adding to it. So we've got a few appearing in our word cloud. So some of the words that have connected with people, intersectionality has been a huge one, which I think Pheona spoke to excellently in our presentation. Safety, hope, anti-racism, been something that resonated with folk. A couple others, individual power, like that. So the fact that individuals have the opportunity to change things within their own sector. Overcoming self-doubt, it's a really important one. Impact, disaggregated data, yeah, for all the data nerds among us, very, very important. Fantastic. So we've got quite a few sharing, but just for time, I'm going to take us on to the next question. Please keep submitting them. You can stay on the page if you want to. But I'm going to take us to our next question. So you can add a bit more detail if you want, and quite a few people have been adding some ideas into the Q&A already on this. But what are your ideas for how we can grow feminist leadership in Scotland? We're really keen to bring everyone who's here together to share different ideas. We've had some fantastic examples from speakers of specific programs, different accreditation that employers can, work towards, different kind of names of resources or training companies, but also, you might just have general ideas for what you want to see within your own workplace or your own sector. So just give you a minute or two to have a look at some of these responses. So again, some interesting ideas have come up which were already shared at the start of the session about mentoring, learning from each other. You want to see more events like this? Fantastic. Yep, sharing the examples of organisations which are already doing this. Sometimes it's just we don't know each other, but we're actually practicing feminist leadership in isolation. HR issues, yeah, extremely practical and important around what kind of processes are in place for discrimination, for bullying, for harassment. We've done a huge piece on sexual harassment in the workplace, absolutely key in feminist leadership. Leading by example and clear information and guidance on what feminist leadership looks like, which I think we've come to the conclusion is good leadership, which I quite liked earlier, one speaker brought up. Great, yeah, making space for disagreement and dialogue, genuine integration of class and analysis, yeah. Being radical ambition, I like that. And again, keep adding to this, but we're going to go on to our last question. And it's something that, you don't need to think of right now, but we would absolutely love for this to be a bit of a call to action. Obviously, not just for you individually who are on the call, but also everyone that you work with, people in your life, within your sector. What actions practically can you take? So we've already seen some ideas on the previous slide, sort of about, what does progress look like? But individually, what would you do after today? Fantastic, yeah, having a look at the resources that we have, getting in touch with us, following up with us after the session. We want to hear from anyone and everyone on the call. Sharing the report, raising awareness of the findings. The more people talking about this, the more we're going to get these conversations going. And really challenging perceptions that maybe, we've got equality now. Actually, these are facts that you can use in your own world to really kind of advocate. Brilliant, yeah. So in your own workplace, maybe disseminating that information, doing a session with colleagues, building gender into your research, yeah, looking at what are the practices you have within your own workplace. Can you do what Suzanne did and really challenge some of the culture there in terms of what type of data is collected, what sort of processes you take? And creating space for discussion. I think that's the thing, it's a step at a time, and even just bringing this up as a conversation can sometimes lead to great things in a couple of years. We know this isn't going to happen overnight. And speaking up, yeah. Yes, intersectional representation, again, such a strong theme. You might have more women coming into your workplace or into your sector, but are they from diverse backgrounds? Probably the answer is no, if across most sectors. So really looking at that, which women are we including? What kind of barriers are we breaking down for intersectional experiences of gender inequality? But I'd love it if you could keep sharing your ideas. Again, I know some people need a bit of time to percolate and think about, what actions are you going to take, but we're going to leave the Menti open. So please kind of share more thoughts after the session. But I'll hand back to Jade and Kat, who are going to kind of take us through some of the Q&A to finish us off. So thanks for engaging in that, everyone.
Thanks, Lucy. And thanks everybody for your engagement on the Menti, but also the questions and comments that you have been sending through in the chat. We have captured all of them. I don't know if I'll be able to sum all of them up or raise all of them now, but we will try and connect you to the people, the speakers that you asked the questions of, and try and get some answers for you. But just to highlight some of the things that have been raised, there was a few people raising issues around the experience of intersectional discrimination in public transport, particularly for Muslim women and for disabled women in terms of accessibility or discriminatory violence against women that unfortunately many Muslim women report in Scotland. So people were interested to share these things, just to kind of really drill down into the differences in women's experiences and the importance of recognising those differences. One of there's a couple of questions that I'm going to specifically flag. There were lots and lots of people agreeing with Fiona's points around intersectionality and welcoming what Pheona had to say. One of the specific questions that has been asked is around that kind of like one of the issues that we see whenever responses are tokenistic within organisations to women and intersectional representation. Whenever organisations do stuff, do the kind of equality, diversity and inclusion work, but it's tokenistic. What women have been telling us in the chat, but wanted to hear from the speakers about as well, was how do you address the fact that when it's all very well us talking nicely about these issues, but whenever you have to raise concerns, you have to critique things that are being done. And I think, Pheona, you mentioned this when you were speaking, when people have said to you that speaking about racism isn't nice or pleasant. When you have to have those difficult conversations, that one of the things that can happen is that you're problematized, that you then become characterized as a troublemaker within an organization, passed over for promotion and things like that. So one of those, I think it's important that we recognize those things, but it was also just to hear from the speakers, if any of the speakers wanted to come in on those things around how do you effectively challenge issues, and how do you, what more do we need to do to respond to this issue, where there are lots of lovely organisations that are very happy to do really nice, happy clappy equalities work, but the minute anybody causes, then the minute anybody asks really like more difficult questions about disabled women's representation, Black and minority ethnic women's representation, and then things shut down and the individual can be problematised. So I didn't know if anybody wanted to come in on that. No. One of the, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see the hands there. Pheona, do you want to come in, and then Jackie?
I think Jackie had her hand
up
first. Okay. Do you want to go, Jackie?
Go ahead, Pheona.
Yeah, those are key elements because one of the reasons why that kind of behavior is endemic, where people who raise issues are problematized, is because we remain minoritized and we're still a small number. And so what we usually say is not, because the problem is not with the individual, the problem is not with the women, the problem is not with the person that comes from the minoritized group. The problem is with the organization. And I think to address issues like that has to come from organizations. Organizations can do a number of things, but I'll mention two things that can be done. First and foremost, if you were recruiting from a group from women, for example, you need to ensure that at the table you have not just 1-2 people representing. You need more than that. You need over-representation in certain spaces, because what that does, it allows for the conversation to be more equitable, and it challenges the dominant culture that might not hear or listen to that single Black woman at the table against or around 15, 20 other people, or even 6 people that do not necessarily see what the issue that is being brought to the table is. And so representation has to really increase significantly to change that. In the event that that is not happening quickly, which we know it isn't, there needs to be systems, and organizations need to educate themselves on how they change that from the perspective of the majority. So if we have majority men, majority white people, we need to be thinking about that single person at the table, or that one person when they speak. What do we hear? And are we hearing it from the lens that we should be hearing it from? Are we hearing it from our privileged lens, where we do not see what the actual issues are? And from that perspective, we address the systemic dominant culture that does not allow for these voices to be heard, and therefore the voices get problematized. And so as an organization, we need to encourage organizations to think about their systems. And lastly, actually, I should mention that one of the things that we do when we train on anti-racism and anti-discrimination is to look at your grievance processes. It's really important that those processes are culture sensitive, that they understand the systemic aspects and how those systemic biases are encoded within the grievance processes, within the systems. Often you have to report to your line manager, who probably might be the problem, and then it goes on, and you're the one that doesn't have the power but have nowhere else to go. So there has to be an engagement with what systems are in place to protect the voices of those that are not often heard.
Thanks so much, Pheona. I'm just before I bring Jackie in, thank you so much, Pheona. That's so useful. We're going to run over by about 5 minutes, I think, so we can deal with some of the questions. If anybody had to leave, please feel free to do so. But if you can stay on, that would be great too. But we'll try and keep it to 5 minutes. Thanks, Jackie. Do you want to come in?
Thank you. And actually, some of what I wanted to say, Fiona's just actually covered. So thank you, Pheona. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves in organisations. So I mentioned the fact that we had managed to, over a period of 3 years, attract individuals from ethnic minorities onto our board, but our staff, you know, if you look at the demographic in West Lothian and the proportion of the population and the adult population who are from ethnic minorities, our staff profile doesn't reflect that. So we've got a much lower proportion of staff who are from an ethnic minority than we have of students. We've got a lot of we have a really good representation of students and now on the board. So we have to do something about that. Now, I don't know what to do about that, but I have to understand that I need to speak to people who will offer insights that I don't have and that some in the organisation don't have. So, for example, we engage with organisations like the West Lothian Community Race Forum, Fair Justice System for Scotland, to get their perspectives on what that is. And I was really taken by what Pheona said about cultural sensitivity, because actually that was something I noticed when we were recruiting for board members, that the way that we interviewed, the competence-based type process, it just didn't gel or didn't fit with some of those who were coming from different backgrounds, and therefore there was a challenge about them being able to effectively engage in the process. So I think it's really important to engage, and I think to question how we do diversity, equality and inclusion. And I think there's a danger that it's become a little bit blasé, a little bit tick boxy. And one of the things that we've decided to do in August, when our lecturers and our students return, is for our all-staff conference, we are going to focus it on equality, and we're going to focus it on issues that we don't have the answers to try and engage our staff, but have speakers and contributors with lived experience. So I think it's just about being persistent, recognising there's nothing wrong with not knowing the answers. And sometimes as a leader, you think you have to know the answers. And I'm really keen to connect with Pheona, because I think there's somebody there that we could do, I could learn from, and we can maybe do some work together. So I think it's about we don't know all the answers, but there are people out there who are able to help us find those answers and try out some opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jackie. That is certainly something we can relate to as well at Engender. Is something that we need to look internally on. We're, in terms of the diversity of our staffing and bringing, especially across the policy field, bringing more diverse people into that field and why they may not feel at the moment that they want to enter it. So it's something that we need to critically look at as well. So thank you so much for your comments, Pheona and Jackie. I'm going to bring just two quick questions together then, just before we wind up. But we were asked about the fact that we spoke about feminist leadership, and in the original Menti, one of the things that came out really strongly was things like listening, compassion, sharing power. But these are not necessarily seen as historical, you know, the kind of classical heroic leadership model that is very masculine and is very kind of still predominant in organisations and in society as the kind of most valued type of leadership. So we had a question around that about how do you push back? How do you push back and ensure that your style of leadership, more compassionate, listening, sharing power styles of intersectional feminist leadership are valued and are seen as value, and you push back against this kind of outdated classical model of leadership? And then just finally, we had someone who asked if anybody can share kind of good spaces for female leaders or women leaders that might exist in Scotland for women to kind of share experiences, seek mentorship, be able to kind of work together and support each other. So if anybody has any suggestions about good networks in Scotland for diverse women in leadership, then please do share them in the chat and we will share them after the event. I don't know if any of the speakers want to come in on those final questions. No, I think we're... Oh, yeah, Jackie, do you want to come in? Yeah.
I was trying to find my hand, sorry.
Please do, please go ahead, Jackie.
Oh, very quickly, I mean, I think on the first point that you make about pushback against masculine leadership, I mean, I think certainly from my reading of in LinkedIn and all the different articles that I read, good leadership is not traditionally what is perceived as masculine in previous generations. So I guess it's about pushing back against that and illustrating good examples of it and calling out where it is toxic, for example, in some of the parliamentary circles down south. But I think there's something there about, I mean, I was quite taken about feminist leadership, about how it mirrors very much the leadership that I aspire to and that I think most of my leadership team aspire to, but I would never have described it as feminist leadership. So there's maybe something there about aligning it with all the modern thinking on leadership, which is different from that which you described, which was a kind of traditional style, which many people still aspire to.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up there. We'll try and capture the questions and connect people after the event today when we send information out to participants. But I'm just going to hand back to Jade now just to wrap up.
Thanks so much, Kat. Thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for those brilliant responses. That concludes today's event. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to my Engender colleagues for their fantastic work creating this report and making today a reality. Thank you to our brilliant three speakers, Jackie Galbraith, Pheona Matovu and Suzanne Motherwell. Thank you to you for joining us, centering feminism and feminist leadership in your work and joining us to explore that today. Thank you. The findings of this report, they might be dispiriting, but I think the energy, the commitment, the insight from all those joining the call today through the Menti and from our speakers is far from dispiriting. So thank you for joining us. We'll do a follow-up email and share all the details that we've noted throughout. In the meantime, you can email us, you can contact us on social media, of course. If you're not a member of Engender, please do sign up. The fees are small and they're waived for anyone who might need that. You'll receive our Friday Feminist 5 email, which is a collection of loads of great info for feminists in Scotland. There's job opportunities, articles, news from us in Engender, our partners. It's a great roundup and we'd love for you to receive it if you don't already. So please do sign up. Thank you so much for joining us. The report, of course, has been released today and we'd love for you to help share it online if you can. So have a look on our social for that. Have a great day. Thanks.